So here I'm going to be showing you how I execute a watercolor process using, of course, one of my previous exercises for shading and shadowing. So here I'm transferring the image by doing some points onto the watercolor paper because I don't want to kind of smudge the opposite side of the paper and transfer it onto the watercolor paper surface. So this is a much cleaner method. So point by point. I'm using an F pencil, which is very sharp and neutral and quite light penciling. Here we have the finish penciling. I'm just darkening some of the edges, but not to a point where you can destroy the watercolor paper. So particularly here, the paper is cellulose. It's not 100% cotton. So this is a 300 grams per square meter by Daler Rowney. They come in around 12 to 20 sheets. They cost something like a 500 peso or a $10 US. So here I'm constructing some of the values I'm going to be using. So I'm going to first sort of like create this value system. And here is the finish pencil. So this is the previous work that I did with marker pens. So now I'm executing a more of a T consistency. So you can see that I'm going to be spreading this downward all the way throughout. So this is the lightest value out of the 6. So I'm doing a 6-step value wash. And here I'm going to be using this as a gauge in applying it onto the figure that I've just drawn on the left. So right now I'm going to be coloring this T consistency onto the entire figure. So this is the lightest value onto the object, except that on the lower level flat, I did not color it. That's going to be the lightest, where the light is going to be hitting the strongest. So I'm carefully just pushing the pigment all the way to the edges and the corners. After 10 minutes, I did the next layer, which I put a bit more pigment onto the mix, but not too much. So that becomes like the second value. Now, since everything is dry again, so I'm going to be applying this now. The faces that are like parallel to the leftmost, so the surfaces, plus the shadow cast onto the object surface. So I'm carefully just pushing all the pigments. So I'm working as fast as I can. So it's important also to have a very sharp, pointy brush that loads up. So I recommend like number 10 or 12. So particularly I'm using a sable type of brush, which is from animal hair. So the underneath of the column is also included in this value, as well as that phase. And then I'm going to be pushing and working as fast as I can and being careful at the same time. Here, I even include, of course, the underneath of the figure of this overhang. And I have the tissue paper very handy on to the right, so that I could control the wetness of the brush. So like I'm taking off and just draining a bit of the pigment off from the brush. Now I'm pushing a bit more with the tip. So that's the second stage of this. And then after drying for another 10 minutes, I move on to the next value, which is going to be the third bar, which I'm going to darken all the way to the end again. So each time, it's very important that you have your value, the first initial washes dried up thoroughly. So you could use actually an electric fan for 10 minutes, but I discourage anyone from using a blow dryer for hair, the one with heat, because it's going to kind of ruin and buckle the paper a bit more. So right here, I'm washing that again, that face a bit more darker so they could differentiate between the surfaces. So the value is contrasting to each other. So then that's the finish so far. And then, so I let it dry again for 10 minutes. I mix my value again, of course, with more pigment, but this time it's more of the milk consistency. So this value is going to be for the underneath of the columns. Again, it's important to have a pointy brush. You could use a nylon brush, of course. This is what I'm using right now. For a smaller detail area, for more control, you could always dry up your brush to unload that pigment a bit. And I'm applying more pigment just to contrast it a bit better than the rest. So I was covering the surfaces that were facing the ground. And here, second to the last value, it's more of a bit more pigment into the mixture with water. And so that becomes now my shadow value. So I'm showing also a bit of that shadow onto that surface. Okay, so now to the last value, which is the darkest. So this one isn't really going to be applied onto the figure, but rather onto the value bar here. So just to finish the step bar. So it's similar to the surfaces value of this sort of a cube. So it has 6 surfaces that are oriented differently. And this one, the last value could be underneath, but it's not going to be shown. So anyway, that ends this demonstration. And I hopefully you get the lesson here. So I'm going to be at the end, of course, always clean your brushes. So if you notice, I have 2. One is for cleaning and one is for fresh water. So I use mineral filtered water. So see you again in the next video.